Imagine staring at a blank Scrivener document, right? You're tasked with inventing an entire galaxy from scratch.
Oh, the absolute worst.
It really is. You could
Yeah.
create anything, like literally anything at all. A planet made entirely of shattered glass? Sure.
Synthetic spiders.
Exactly. Synthetic spiders, why not? But because you can do anything, your mind just goes completely blank in that moment.
Yeah, infinite freedom is actually the enemy of creativity.
It's totally paralyzing. When you can do anything, you usually end up doing nothing.
Right. A blank canvas on a cosmic scale isn't inspiring to the human brain. More often than not, it's just a massive psychological roadblock. We suffer from, decision fatigue before we even write the first word.
And that exact tension, that paralysis of the infinite, is what we are tackling in today's deep dive. We're on a mission to explore the underlying mechanics of limitless imagination.
How do you actually systematize the unknown?
Exactly. And to figure that out, we're digging into a truly fascinating source text called Ancient Wonders. It's this modular expansion created by Ludic Penn and General Director Samuel Rondon Acevedo.
For the sci-fi tabletop role-playing game Ironsworn, Starforged.
Yes. And regardless of whether you have ever rolled a polyhedral die or, touched a tabletop game in your life, you are going to want to pay attention to the architecture of this book.
Oh, absolutely. What this document represents is just a masterclass in systems thinking.
It really is. It takes the overwhelming, paralyzing chaos of an entire galaxy and just breaks it down into an elegant, highly structured engine for storytelling.
So whether you're a novelist trying to build a cohesive new universe or a creative director plotting out a massive project,
Or just someone who loves contemplating the cosmos, right?
Yeah.
Wondering how it all fits together. This is quite literally a blueprint for generating compelling sci-fi realities.
it really gives you the tools to do it.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because the sheer scale of the material we're looking at is awe-inspiring. We're talking about generating entire solar systems from scratch, but doing it with rigorous logic.
Yeah, and the core philosophy driving Ancient Wonders is what the designers call a system-agnostic approach.
Right.
Which means while it's built specifically to expand the Starforged universe, the underlying framework, like the random tables, the generators, the physics logic, it can all be unplugged and dropped into absolutely any science fiction setting.
I was initially looking at this like a box of cosmic Legos, but that metaphor doesn't quite do it justice, I think.
No, it's much more active than that.
Yeah, it's less like being handed static building blocks and much more like being handed the actual physics engine of a video game.
Exactly. You aren't just placing rigid pieces. You're setting the gravity,
Yeah.
defining the thermal reality, and kind of letting the world generate itself.
And the book focuses on what they call marvels of foregone ages. So that includes macro-level generation like solar systems and planets, all the way down to alien megastructures and megacities built by long-dead civilizations.
It even generates constructs, which are synthetic beings, and biomechs.
Oh man, the biomechs are wild. This whole synthesis of biology and machine. Plus, there is this incredible concept called splinters, which are these reality-bending artifacts. We'll definitely get to those.
It's an incredibly rich toolkit, but having all those tools to generate weird and wild stuff presents a distinct challenge.
Right. If I can just generate whatever I want, doesn't it become a chaotic mess? How do you organize infinity without it turning into an incoherent narrative soup?
What's fascinating here is how the system answers that exact question using something called oracles.
Right, the oracle.
Yeah. In this framework, an oracle is essentially a random table driven by percentile dice. So you're rolling two 10-sided dice to get a number between 1 and 100.
But these aren't just lists of random space junk you might find in a drawer. I loved looking at the action and theme oracles here.
They're brilliant.
Instead of handing you a pre-written story or a rigid scenario, it forces you to roll those percentile dice twice to generate a highly calculated prompt.
Right. The first roll gives you a verb from the action table. You might roll a 1, which corresponds to the word abandon, or you might roll a 58, which gives you investigate.
And then your second roll gives you an abstract noun from the theme table.
Exactly. So an 88 gives you technology, and a 13 gives you corruption.
So you end up with a two-word prompt like abandon technology or investigate corruption. This stood out to me as a brilliant creative hack because of the psychology behind it.
It totally bypasses the blank page problem.
Yes. When you give the human brain a blank page, the default mode network just spins its wheels. But when you hand the brain two entirely unrelated words like abandon and technology, you bypass decision fatigue entirely.
Your brain's pattern recognition software immediately kicks in to build a bridge between those concepts.
Right.
Those two words become the guardrails for your imagination. Like, say you're exploring a derelict space station and you don't know what's behind a locked door. Rolling abandoned technology sparks an instant scenario.
Maybe you find a cult of human survivors who have smashed all the computer terminals and gone completely feral.
Oh, I like that. Or if you roll corrupt an atmosphere, maybe you realize the life support system hasn't just broken down, it's been intentionally weaponized by a malignant alien spore.
It's so cool. The oracles don't write the story for you. They constrain your brain just enough to force a creative connection.
It's the friction that sparks the fire. Every time.
And how this philosophy of using structured constraints scales all the way up to the geometry of space itself is just wild to me, because the macro physics of a solar system operate on the exact same logic.
To systematize abstract ideas, we use oracles. But how do we systematize actual space?
Right. Ancient Wonders completely redefines what a sector of space even is.
Yeah, in a lot of soft sci-fi, a sector is just a vague, nebulous bubble of space with some planets floating in it wherever the plot needs them to be.
Which is fine for movies, but
But Ancient Wonders forces you to anchor your imagination into a concrete, mathematically mapped out solar system.
the architecture is incredibly specific. The system maps out a central stellar object, and surrounding that star are exactly 6 planetary orbits and 5 interplanetary orbits.
Those interplanetary orbits being the literal gaps between the planets.
Right, and the book specifically reserves them for generating asteroid belts or debris fields. And you can use their quick solar system generation tables to populate those slots instantly.
Or you can manually plot everything out using detailed hex coordinates on a map.
Which is a crucial detail, right? The hex grid.
Oh, absolutely. The use of a hexagonal grid rather than a standard checkerboard square grid is fundamental to modeling space. Hexes allow for equidistant movement in 6 different directions.
Because in the vacuum of space, you aren't constrained by roads or right angles.
Exactly. A hex map lets you accurately track fuel consumption, trajectory, and multi-directional movement in a way a square grid simply cannot simulate.
And before you even start placing planets on those hexes, the system actively accounts for human expansion. You have to decide what region of space this solar system occupies.
Which immediately dictates the tone of your story.
Yeah. There are 3 distinct regions. The terminus is humanity's most inhabited, civilized area. A solar system generated here automatically starts with 4 distinct settlements.
Lots of people, lots of politics.
Right. Then you have the outlands, which is the frontier. It's territorial, poorly controlled, maybe a bit lawless. An outland system gets 3 settlements.
And finally, the expanse.
The expanse. This is the dark, dangerous, isolated edge of known space. It only gets 2 sparse settlements.
By forcing you to pick a region and strictly allocating the number of settlements, the system dictates the exact flavor of survival you're about to experience.
Here's where it gets really interesting. It's basically like establishing city zoning laws, but for the universe. The zoning dictates the behavior.
You know instantly if you're going to be dealing with claustrophobic political intrigue in a crowded terminus system or desperate, resource-starved isolation in the expanse before you even know what the planets look like.
It solves the blank canvas problem from the top down. But I think the real brilliance of the system is how it links that macro-level zoning directly to physical causality.
Yes, the heat mapping.
Once you have the geometry mapped out, you have to place the heart of the solar system, which is the star itself. And looking at the stellar object oracle, the diversity is staggering.
These are not just your standard burning yellow suns.
Not at all.
When you roll to generate the stellar object, you might get a hypergiant generating turbulent solar winds. You might get a white dwarf shining with spectral light, a young star incubating in a molecular cloud,
Or even a black hole.
a black hole. There's even a chance you roll an artificial star constructed by a long-dead civilization.
Which is such a cool prompt. So the macro physics of the star clearly dictate the visual flavor of the system. But wait, if I roll a black hole for one solar system and a burning yellow star for another, how does the system make that physically matter?
How does it stop being just a cool desktop wallpaper?
Yeah, how does it actually impact the worlds orbiting it?
This brings us to the planetary heat mechanic. Every single type of stellar object has a specific 6-segment heat map associated with it.
And those 6 segments perfectly align with the 6 planetary orbits we mapped out earlier.
Exactly. The star strictly dictates the temperature of each specific orbit.
And those temperatures range across 6 levels, right? Searing, hot, warm, cool, cold, and frigid.
Right. So if you roll a standard burning yellow star, the first 2 orbits closest to it are searing, the third is hot, the fourth and fifth are warm, the sixth is cold.
It beautifully mimics our own solar system to a degree.
It does. But if you roll a black hole, the logic completely shifts.
Okay, this blew my mind. If you roll a black hole, the first orbit is actually searing.
Yeah, people don't expect that.
Wait, a black hole is searing. Let's break that down. Because people think of black holes as just dark, freezing voids.
Right, but this is simulating the accretion disk.
Yes. That massive halo of superheated gas, dust, and debris that is violently swirling around the black hole's event horizon at close to the speed of light.
The sheer friction of that material generates immense, blinding radiation.
So it is literally baking whatever planet is unfortunate enough to be in that first orbit.
Exactly, the mechanism at play. But because a black hole isn't emitting traditional solar heat across vast distances, that temperature drops off a cliff.
Right. The second orbit immediately plummets to cool.
And the third, fourth, fifth, and sixth orbits are entirely frigid.
Wow.
Alternatively, if you roll a hypergiant, the massive output means the first 3 orbits are searing, the fourth is hot, and the fifth and sixth are warm. There is no cold or frigid orbit anywhere in a hypergiant system.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, this means the system forces you to create logically sound ecosystems. You use a table called planetary class based on heat.
Right, the constraints.
If an orbit is searing, the system restricts you to generating things like a furnace world or a desert world. If an orbit is frigid, you are restricted to ice worlds, or maybe a shattered world or a grave world.
You don't just get a random ice planet magically existing right next to a hypergiant star. The fiction adheres to a physical thermal reality.
The limitations of the heat map do the heavy lifting for your imagination.
If you find a planet in a frigid orbit around a black hole, and you roll on the table and get a Jovian world, which is a gas giant.
Your brain instantly synthesizes those constraints.
It's not just a gas giant. It's a dark, frozen, terrifying gas giant orbiting in pitch blackness.
Okay, so we've systematized space and we've systematized the thermal physics. We have a frozen grave world orbiting a black hole. But a frozen grave world is just a static painting until someone actually walks on it.
Right, the boots on the ground aspect.
How does the system simulate the actual friction of exploring that ice? Let's take the deep dive down to the micro level.
It splits planet-side exploration into highly specific tables, primarily dividing planets into lifeless and life-bearing categories.
Okay.
When you are exploring and you need to generate a hazard, you roll on the planet-side peril oracle. But the constraints shift depending on the biosphere.
The contrast here is so smart. Like, if you were on a lifeless planet, a peril might be encountering a corrosive substance or environment or experiencing a sudden seismic or volcanic upheaval.
It's all about the brute force of an environment trying to crush you.
Yeah. But if you are on a life-bearing planet, the perils shift to biological threats. Things like malignant spores or a threatening life form drawing near.
Or the sudden, chilling realization that the local wildlife is being guided by a greater threat.
Oh, that one is creepy. The environment intrinsically informs the danger. But Ancient Wonders introduces a mechanic here designed to completely shatter your expectations of those environments.
Which brings us to the cursed tables.
The cursed tables. These are marked throughout the document with an ominous little skull icon. The way it works is, when you roll your 2 10-sided dice to consult an oracle, you can choose to roll a third die alongside them.
This is a special colored die called the cursed die.
Right. If that cursed die lands on a 10, whatever result you got on the main oracle is completely thrown out. Your answer is cursed, and you have to consult an extreme, terrible version of the table.
It is the ultimate wild card.
But I'm going to push back on this mechanic pretty hard.
Okay, let's hear it.
If I'm a creator, and I've spent an hour building a very tense, carefully curated, hard sci-fi tone for a desolate, lifeless planet, doesn't throwing a random wildcard in there just ruin the narrative cohesion?
How do you mean?
Like, if I have a 10% chance of triggering random chaos, it feels like it would shatter the suspension of disbelief and turn the story into a cartoon. Doesn't a cursed die just feel like the game is punishing you for exploring?
That's a common initial reaction. But this raises an important question about the difference between random chaos and contextual chaos.
Contextual chaos.
Yes. The cursed die is not injecting random, unrelated goofiness into your hard sci-fi setting. It uses an extreme version of the specific table you were already rolling on. It scales the current danger exponentially.
So it doesn't just drop a cartoon anvil on your head. It extrapolates the existing environment to its absolute worst-case scenario.
Precisely.
Yeah.
As a writer or a player, it's very easy to fall into a comfortable rhythm. You figure out the pattern of the planet, you know how to handle local hazards, and things get safe.
And a story without friction is a dead story.
Exactly. The cursed die is a narrative catalyst. You're walking across a seemingly empty, lifeless world. You roll the cursed die on a peril, and suddenly you don't just find a corrosive puddle.
Right.
You trigger a chaotic, region-wide meteoroid storm. Or you stumble into a dense, anomalous nebula cloud that has somehow settled right on the planet's surface.
Or, perhaps most unsettling, you find a derelict human starship buried in the ice in a sector of space where humanity is never supposed to have been.
See, he doesn't break the rules. He pushes them to the breaking point.
That makes total sense. It forces you to improvise within the logic of the world, rather than breaking the logic of the world.
Exactly.
And speaking of extreme logic-breaking scenarios, we have to talk about splinters. I mentioned them at the top of the deep dive, and they are the perfect example of what happens when you hit the absolute extremes of this generation system.
Splinters are arguably the most fascinating marvel in the entire book.
They really are.
While you are generating planets and megastructures, you might roll the discovery of a splinter. These are ancient, localized artifacts from eons ago that have survived the crushing passage of time.
But they aren't just old relics. They actively cause anomalies in reality itself.
Because they systematize the weird. If the heat maps and the hex grids ground the universe in hard physics, splinters are the system's way of introducing controlled, localized magic, for lack of a better word.
Right. When you find one, you roll on an anomaly table to see how this artifact is breaking the laws of physics.
And the generators for these are incredibly evocative. You might generate a small, unassuming metallic prism that perfectly silences all sound within a 50-meter radius,
Oh, that's eerie.
or a crystalline shard that causes localized time dilation, where a day near the artifact equals a year outside of its radius.
I generated one while reading through the source material. I rolled a localized gravity anomaly tied to a piece of ancient jewelry.
Okay, let's hear the scenario.
Imagine your characters are trekking across a high-gravity furnace world, struggling to even lift their boots, and they find a perfectly preserved alien pendant half buried in the searing sand.
Okay.
And within a 10-foot radius of this tiny pendant, gravity is entirely reversed. Rocks and sand are just floating upward in a continuous, silent column towards space.
Wow.
The artifact is completely defying the meticulous thermal and gravitational realities we just spent all this time building.
Which is exactly why it feels so impactful. The anomaly only feels wondrous because the baseline reality of the solar system is so rigorously structured. You can't break the rules effectively unless you have firmly established the rules first.
So what does this all mean? When we look at the entirety of Ancient Wonders, the rigid hex-grid orbital tracks, the hypergent heat maps, the psychological constraints of the action and theme oracles, the contextual chaos of the cursed dice, and the reality-bending splinters, it proves a fundamental truth about creativity.
And what's that?
True, boundless creativity doesn't actually come from a completely blank canvas.
No, it requires boundaries. You build the sandbox, you define the absolute physics of the sand using heat and gravity, and then you let the chaos unfold within those specific boundaries.
The constraints force your brain out of its default mode and into active problem solving.
By utilizing structured limitations, by forcing yourself to explain why an ancient time-dilating splinter exists on a frigid ice world orbiting a dying white dwarf, our minds connect disparate dots.
The friction of the rules generates far richer, more logical, and infinitely more surprising universes than we could ever just dream up from scratch while staring at a blinking cursor.
And you can apply these tools to anything. Your own creative writing, designing a video game, running a business scenario.
Or honestly, just changing the way you look at the night sky. It gives you a highly structured framework to understand the vast unknown.
It absolutely does.
And as we wrap up this deep dive into the source material, I want to leave you with one final thought to mull over regarding those splinters. We're talking about ancient items that survive the crushing weight of deep time, altering reality for whoever stumbles across them millions of years later.
Right.
If our civilization were to vanish today, what splinters of ours would survive an eternity in the dark? What seemingly mundane artifact of human history would outlast our solar system? And what kind of bizarre reality-bending anomalies would it cause for whoever or whatever rolls the dice to explore our world next?
That is a brilliant question. When the heat map of our own yellow star finally goes frigid, what is the legacy we leave behind in the hex grid?
The next time you look up at that staggering, beautiful night sky, remember, it's not a paralyzing blank canvas, it's an engine just waiting for a framework.